Hey everyone, this is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology, and today we are going to take a look at another major transit of the week, which is Venus's entrance into Gemini, where she immediately makes a square to Saturn in the sign of Pisces. So we're going to take some time today to reflect on some of the most important lessons that this square has to teach us, or any Venus-Saturn square to a certain extent, any Venus, hard Saturn-Venus aspect in general. You could also include the opposition in there. So at any rate, that is our mission for the day. Before we get into it, as always, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps the channel to grow. I love hearing your guys' comments. It also apparently helps the videos to do better in the algorithm or whatever. So really appreciate when you guys chime in. Transcripts of any of my daily talks, including today's, can be found on the website, nightlightastrology.com. I want to take you over there right now because we are in enrollment season. So you guys know that every 6 months we begin a new one-year program in ancient Hellenistic astrology. And I just want to say that I'm really excited to see the big response we've had right out the gate here with, especially with our need-based tuition contracts, which we are very happy to provide for people. So anyway, if you go over to the website, which is nightlightastrology.com, click on the courses tab, click on the first year course, you can scroll down and learn more about it. It's 30 courses on the year. You can see what some of our alumni have had to say about the experience. I don't know why that's not loading. Oh, I guess it's still loading. Okay. Well, there's 30 classes on the year, and we have 12 guest teachers outside of those 30 classes. They are all recorded, so you can follow along with the webinars live, or you can watch the replays on the class website. And those are all yours to keep and download. All the material in the course can be kept and downloaded, lifetime access to it. We have an interactive group forum discussion with a tutoring staff. So if you need help throughout the program, you always can submit questions about the material and get an answer from our staff within 24 hours. And you can contact me throughout the course anytime with questions too. We also have breakout study sessions in between our major units of study. So there's just a lot of support built in for you and a lot of community options too. We have usually in every group, we have people organizing study sessions outside of class in addition to our breakout study sessions, and really great community vibe that we tend to get out of our program. So we welcome you to check it out. And when you are on the website, I also want you to scroll down to the bottom of the page and be sure to check out the need-based tuition assistance. You'll see it on the right-hand side there at the bottom. And the need-based tuition assistance is there for people who maybe you're on a really tight budget and you can only allocate a certain amount to something extra like taking an astrology course, but it's your passion or a hobby that you'd really like to develop, something you like to do for yourself and your spiritual growth. So we understand we understand people are at a variety of different positions in life. And so the need-based tuition assistance is there. People are starting to take up those contract spots pretty quickly. We do have a limited number of them available, so be sure that you take advantage of that right away. We have a payment plan option available if you would like that. And we also have an early bird payment that will save you a good amount off of the course tuition if you want to use that as well. So any questions about the need-based tuition options or the course, let us know by emailing us, info@nightlightastrology.com. And don't forget, at the top of the page, you can also check out the Year 2 program and the horary courses that begin in June as well. Those are for people who are already enrolled in our classes, but don't forget those are starting in June. And for a lot of you, we'd love to see you come back and check out the Year 2 program, where we deepen everything that we built on in the first year program. So anyway, thank you guys for letting me advertise my programs. I really appreciate it. And let's get into today's astrology. So we are looking at Venus in the sign of Gemini. Just recently ingressed into the sign of Gemini, and we can see that ingress really around Tuesday of this week, April 11th, if I've got that right about then. And then by the latter part of the week here, by Friday, April 14th, we see the square. And so that square will be in effect this week and into the weekend for sure. And let's see if I can just draw out the connection here. We'll see if my there it is, and it's working today. Great. I feel I mean, I have to come up with a name for the pen. You guys, I'm gonna take suggestions in the comment section. What should the pen's name be? I feel like she's a Carol, maybe a Carol. Yeah, that feels about right. Was one of the Golden Girls named Carol? I can't remember. She feels like one of the Golden Girls. Okay, anyway. So the Venus-Saturn square is there. And Venus square Saturn is a transit that gets a lot of bad press. Oh, Venus is square Saturn, you know, like, oh my God, everyone's gonna break up. All love is going to fail us. We're gonna get into fights with our loved ones. It's Venus square Saturn. But I think that we need to go beyond that, although there definitely can be an element of, a gravitas around love, relationships, sexuality, harder conversations, and all of that that can happen in love and relationships with Saturn, or even broken friendships and whatever. It's like there's always, in the astrological textbooks, there's always like line 1A, trouble in love for, Venus, Saturn. But I think we have to get a little bit more, we get deeper into the archetypal combination to uncover some of its deeper teachings. And there's many. And it also depends on which signs they're in. So Venus in Gemini and squaring Saturn in Pisces. When Saturn in Pisces, by the way, has the superior position within the square, it means Saturn's really impressing itself on Venus right now, a very playful Venus in the airy double-bodied sign of Mercury. So what does that look like? It's a little bit different. I haven't been doing this for a while, and I realized all of a sudden that I miss doing it, which is, it's just things come and go in your practice and in your content creation life. I hadn't brought in an I Ching reading for a long time. And so I was like, you know what, today we're going to bring in an I Ching reading. Now, I am by no means an I Ching master or anything like that, but I've been using the I Ching to help inform the way that I write and present my content for at least 10 years. So, it's something that I like to throw in there as a way of getting into the archetypal combination a little bit more. So I'm going to bring that in at different points today. But if you want to check out that, if you wanted to pause and even just go and take a look at the reading for today, the reading for today that I did came back hexagram 21 with lines 3 and 6 changing, specifically line 3 is the focal point, turning into hexagram 55. So I will be kind of covering that a little bit. And for those of you who don't know anything about the I Ching, don't worry about it. You'll hear it seamlessly incorporated into the way that I present these most important lessons that Venus in Gemini square Saturn in Pisces teaches us. So number 1 on my list is playfulness and consequences. By the way, someone was like, you always make lists. I was like, well, I'm a list guy. That's my thing. So, so if you don't like it, I'm sure there are other channels that don't utilize lists. But then someone informed me, they were like, the Buddha used lists. And I was like, see, there we go. That's all I'm trying to do here is be the Buddha. So anyway, playfulness and consequences. Here's the thing is that we have, with Venus and Gemini, we have one of the most playful positions that Venus can be in. For example, when Venus was, you might remember, I think it was about the summer of 2020, maybe around June, that Venus went retrograde in Gemini. There was a lot of things that happened around that time, okay? But Venus retrogrades can be involved in times of civil strife, right? And there was a lot of that in June of 2020. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting was that as Venus was in Gemini, and it was in Gemini for a long time because of the retrograde, I got really, really interested in games for my kids, right? Like board games because they were getting to the age where they could start to play board games. And so I was like, hey, let's start ordering, board games online because we were stuck in home too from COVID or whatever. And so it was like, all right, so Hungry Hippos, Chutes and Ladders, Candyland, like all the classics. Don't Break the Ice, or Don't Wake the Dragon. I mean, all sorts of old games that I remember playing as a kid. I just ordered a bunch of them. They're all like $15, $10 on Amazon or something like that. So anyway, Venus in Gemini, suffice to say, is a very, very playful Venus. It is a Venus placement that will often correlate with things like video games, hopscotch, playful, flirtatious kinds of qualities. And so here you have one of the ultimate playful, clever, charming Venus placements in Gemini. And you have Saturn in melancholic Pisces casting a superior square over it. So the combination of playfulness and consequences, or more consequential, heavy, weighty kinds of qualities, is really in the air right now. And one of the greatest lessons we might face this week would be, and it could go in either direction. On the one hand, you might be like, you're being too serious. Have fun, stop thinking so much about all of the consequences and be more spontaneous and free. For example, sometimes my kids before bed will be all like wild and squirrely, and it's always right before bed too. And there's actually some studies that have been done that I've been checking out, that I've been exposed to somehow through the online world, that suggests that actually kids getting out a bunch of energy right before bed can be helpful. Right. So it's funny because I saw that study and I started switching my mentality before bedtime from no wrestling, no jumping around on the beds, like all the stuff that I felt like was probably winding them up. And now I've been like trying to take the brake pedal off from that a little bit and let their nervous systems just regulate themselves. If they want to have this crazy energy right before bed, I've been kind of trusting that it might be okay. I'm trying to convince my wife of that too. She's slowly letting us test it out, but it's actually been working. I kid you not, just to let them play a little bit more right before bed, like, like the 10, 15 minutes, like right before bedtime, and in me playing with them and wrestling with them and stuff like that. It's actually been helpful. And so sometimes there's this way in which, expectations that we have about things, how things ought to be or how things ought to go, can come in and just kill the natural playfulness that of a moment that really isn't doing any harm and is not a threat and is not going to mess anything up. But we worry and we want to control things so much. So I could see one of the lessons of the week going in that direction, where it's like, stop trying to control everything. Just let the free flowing, fun, mercurial, Venusian energies of the moment, just let them do their thing. But on the other hand, you could see it going in the opposite direction. There are times where we have to reel it in. There is a point in the bedtime activities, so to speak, where you have to be like, okay, look, no more talking, like for my kids, they love Calvin and Hobbes. I've been reading them Calvin and Hobbes, the comic strip, and they're like, I'm like, okay, it's time to put that. No more Calvin and Hobbes. You got to put it away. So, by the way, Venus and Gemini is it's just like a fantastic symbol for Calvin and Hobbes on its own for a lot of reasons. But anyway, so it could be that there is something that's not being taken seriously enough, or that's being too it's like you're acting as though you're oblivious to the natural consequences of your behavior or activities, which with Venus could range from, having sex without thinking about what the emotional consequences might be later with the person who wants more than you do or something. Or it could be that, you're going out on a date and someone's hoping for date number 2 and 3 and 4 in a serious relationship, and you're just having fun. And you don't really care what they want because you're just having fun, but then that leads you into all sorts of problems. So it could go in the opposite direction, in other words, where there's some need to think more seriously about the consequences and reel things in or pull things back a little bit. But Saturn things, pull it back, reel it in, put some boundaries around the fun. Because you have to think about the consequences. And if that's the direction that things need to go in this week, you have to discern that. But just because it's Venus square Saturn doesn't mean that Venus needs to be checked. It can also mean that Venus is going to get checked in a way that's not so healthy and needs to be free. So you have to be able to look at the situation and really come in, into I just take some time to contemplate what's going on and what's appropriate in this moment. The tendency right now is going to be for Saturn to be a little bit more heavy-handed. So, Venus, I wouldn't worry as much about Venus sort of overwhelming Saturn as in not respecting boundaries, but more like Saturn trying to assert control over Venus. That's what I'd be a little bit more concerned with right now. All right, well, number 2, the desire to restrain something, but the inability to do so. Now, this is something that the I Ching seem to point to. For example, in hexagram number 21, we talk about, it's sometimes called biting through, and it has the connotation of, it's about penalties. So that hexagram has to do with when penalties or consequences have to be delivered. It has to happen. Well, line 3, which was the changing line of the hexagram, reads like this. And I thought this was interesting. Bites on old dried meat and strikes on something poisonous. Slight humiliation, no blame. Punishment is to be, no, punishment could be penalty, is to be carried out by someone who lacks the power and authority to do so. Therefore, the culprits do not submit. The matter at issue is an old one, as symbolized by salted game. So it's like a piece of dried, aged meat that has some kind of mold in it or something. The matter at issue is an old one, as symbolized by salted game, and in dealing with it, difficulties arise. The old meat is spoiled. By taking up the problem, the punisher arouses poisonous hatred against himself, and in this way is put in a somewhat humiliating position. But since penalty was required by the time, they remain free of blame. That's an interesting statement. And it would seem in this case to be like, oh, let's just say that Saturn is trying to, Saturn is the picture of something that is like a penalty or a restraint or a prohibition, and it's holding Venus back. Venus. Wouldn't that be the greatest new name for the What's your favorite planet? Venus. Okay. Anyway, so if Venus is being restrained by Saturn, but this could also be because, especially because they're both in double-bodied signs. And by the way, Venus, right? Saturn is in Venus's exaltation, so it's actually being hosted by Venus on a certain level. And then Venus and Mercury have mutual reception. This is not exactly a Venus that's just going to like sit there and be totally overwhelmed by Saturn. So let's say that Venus represents something that something that's trying to be restrained or refined, but you're having trouble doing it. You lack the power or authority to do it. Well, sometimes doesn't that happen to us when we have a habit that we know we need to get under control, or a behavior or a pattern that we know we need to like reel in somehow, but we just we're not quite at the space where we have the mojo, within us to do it. I think that happens to us often. And so that might be a problem this week. I'd like to reel something in and get a little bit better control of something, but I'm really lacking the inner fortitude, or it doesn't feel like it's quite the right time, or I have the sufficient power to do so. But it also suggests a kind of test of our power and ability to look at something and put the right parameters or the right boundaries around it. And once we do so, then I think the idea is that, like, for example, in the second hexagram, if we meet that challenge, the second hexagram, number 55, is abundance. And so there's some like feeling of consequences, penalties, boundaries that need to be put around something, maybe so that something doesn't get out of control and can be experienced. We can experience things in a state of abundance, which would mean sort of like a combination of happy and wealthy isn't the right word, but like abundant. The word abundance comes from. So things are happy, abundant, and sort of stable. How do we create that state? It has to do with how well we can sort of regulate something this week. That's what comes to my mind. And in the challenge or inability for some of us to be able to do that could be part of what we're looking at. Anyway, number 3 is penalties or prohibitions that interfere with good fortune. So just generally speaking, Venus was the goddess of good fortune. And fortune was a broad term that just meant how things are going, like the fortune of the world, the fortune of your day, the fortune of the evening. And that has to do with the mood, the vibes. Are you happy? Are things flowing along harmoniously? Are things pleasing? Are things even more than pleasing? They turn out unexpectedly good. And that's really subjective, but Venus is sort of the ruler of like sunny days and nice experiences with friends and happy news. And like, generally speaking, if things are going well in a kind of everyday vibes way, that's Venus's territory. Well, with Saturn overwhelming Venus, you get the feeling that, Saturn could play the role of administrating penalties or prohibitions or blockages that somehow, maybe just temporarily, interfere with good fortune. And then the lesson of the week becomes, how do we respond in a mature way, in a way that's not reactive, impatient, flustered? Like, speaking of kids, my kids, I'm so proud of them when we were like, okay, enough is enough. It's time to really go to bed now. And, on those days where they kind of take it maturely, okay, we're done. I'm always so proud of them. I'm like, wow, they're accepting a limit. And they pushed the limit as far as it could go, and we had fun and we let them, and then they accepted it. And that doesn't always happen, obviously, but you get the idea. Right now, this week, I wonder if our good fortune is not dependent upon our ability to accept some temporary limits that come up. So that's just something to consider for everyone right now. And one of the things that goes along with that is number 4, which is the maturation of Venus. So this is a classic Venus-Saturn theme. You think of the fine wine that needs to mature, and it takes a long time before it reaches its peak to be, I think there's probably with wine, there's certain, I don't know, I'm pretty sure that there's some dates along the aging process where it's like, it's really, really good to drink it here, or don't drink it until it's there. But, a fine wine takes a long time to develop and mature. That's like this exact same lesson that comes up with Venus and Saturn in love, in relationships, in art, in your creative process. Some things take a while to mature. So you think of anything Venusian and the ability for it to grow and become wiser, sturdier, more stable, more committed, it's like Venus is becoming an adult, not that Venus isn't, but you get what I'm saying. So Venus definitely needs to, Venus needs to become an adult. All right. Number 5 would be angsty and romantic. We have Venus in an air sign, Saturn in melancholic Pisces, which is the exaltation of Venus. So I get this like a little bit of, we have Romeo and Juliet, happening over here. And we have like a romantic comedy happening over here with Venus in Gemini. Romeo and Juliet, like the classic, when I was in, I think it was high school, there was the Leonardo DiCaprio and was it Claire Danes? Claire Dane? Version, and it was Baz Luhrmann who did it, and it was so angsty and just perfectly captured the moment. I believe that was actually made. I think that movie was being made and developed and so forth while Saturn was in Pisces. By the way, it was filmed, I think, when Saturn was in Pisces. But regardless, angsty romantic qualities coming together. And then you have, the playful and more sort of airy, social, and, sort of mental energies of Venus in Gemini. So what's going to win out this week? Are we going to have this week where, we're being forced to get into to the mud? There's that saying, of course, lotuses, they come out of the mud or whatever. And you could, there's a bit of that in the air this week, like the lotus comes out of the mud. But then there's also something about like I feel like Venus in Gemini with that Saturn in Pisces is a little bit more like, let's make a mud pie and trick my brother into eating it. Actually happened to my dad when he was a kid. His sister made a mud pie, told him it was a chocolate pie, and got him to eat some of it. But I feel like Venus in Gemini is just so much more of a trickster, so much more playful, and not wanting to be weighed down by the melancholic, watery, heaviness of Saturn and Pisces. So those two qualities are really working this week. You might notice the angsty romantic themes, but you might not love them this week so much, because I'm not sure Venus is really wanting to be pulled down by them. And so just, keep your eye on those themes in general. So one of the things that I loved, I'll just say this about the I Ching hexagram to close. Hexagram 21, when it comes up, it's always a little bit ominous. Like it talks a lot about having to deal with the consequence of a former action, of an old pattern. Saturn and Venus will mature Venus, and sometimes there is a kind of reckoning that in this case, Venus would be probably the Venus-Saturn square would be signifying. But I like that this hexagram transitions into 55, which is really a state of abundance and opulence and wealth and beauty. Venus-Saturn also has these old delineations that are associated with like opulence, like you almost think of like a Victorian old beautiful mansion, or like an antique store filled with treasures. That's a little bit Venus-Saturn like too. So I wonder about the theme of maturation this week, and also how it's related to things becoming the most beautiful thing that they can become. All right. Well, that's what I have for today. I hope that this gives you, again, as always, good things to think about. Don't forget before you leave to like and subscribe if you haven't yet. You can find the transcript of today's talk on the website. If you go over there, be sure to check out my readings and courses. The new course coming up, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystics, starts in June. Year 1 program, Year 2 and Horary also start in June. Check out the need-based tuition options. If you have any questions, if you need a little bit of help taking the program, check that option out. Any questions, email us, info@nightlightastrology.com. All right, that's what I've got for today. Take it easy, everyone. Bye.